Hi, Connection Christian. I am going to be covering the last of the 10 Commandments today, Exodus 20, verse 17. Exodus 20, verse 17 says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." It's often considered that this commandment is America's God because it's our greatest sin of wanting way too much. To covet is to wish to have the possessions of others. We often see this associated with jealousy and envy because we want what others have and what we don't have. When I was doing my research for this particular verse, I saw something that really stuck out to me. And it said that the 10 Commandments kind of have two bookends, where the first commandment is putting God first, having no other gods before him. And then the last one is kind of reiterating that, like, you don't need to worship anything else. God is your sole and only God. And then basically what's in the middle of those two bookends between God being first and not worshiping and having any other gods or idols is the main reasons that we may break the eight commandments that are in between. If we are not putting God first, if we're worshiping something else, we're probably going to break the 8 commandments that sit in between those two. So this is kind of going to be a little bit of all over the place, I kind of feel like, but it's just some of the big things that stuck out to me about what we can learn from this commandment, and also why we covet things. So the first kind of section I'm going to hit on is what we learn. So one of the big things that I noticed is that this commandment, it was written for unhappy people. If we were happy, if we were truly content with what we had in life, we wouldn't covet, we wouldn't be envious of what others have. So I really feel like this commandment was written for the ungrateful people and the ungrateful heart. And something that stuck out to me when I noticed that is another pastor had once said that it's kind of like God's handing out all the goodies, and when he gets to us, we feel like we got the crumbs. Like, we just don't feel like we have gotten enough, or that we were given stuff fairly. We also learn from this that only true contentment can be found in God. We also learn that when something's forbidden, it's often more desirable. And I feel like we know this as like little kids. Like, if I say, don't touch this, we want to touch it. I think that there was a TikTok that came out not too long ago where moms were like putting candy in front of kids and like walking away and saying, don't touch it, you can have some when I get back. And it's that temptation and knowing like it's forbidden. That kind of reminded me of that. We also learn that sometimes when we covet, there's probably something underlying in our life that we're missing, like kind of like a basic need. So, like maybe we're jealous of our neighbor's house. Well, maybe it's because something within our own house we're lacking. Like, I don't know, we don't have a running dishwasher, so we're jealous that they do. I don't know. It just kind of points that there's probably a basic need in our life that's not being fulfilled. And so we're looking at other people in their lives and they have that, and that's when we become jealous. We also learn that we need to pray for God to deal with our resentment and help us meet our needs. When we're feeling this type of envious attitude and jealousy, we need to pray to God that he can help correct that in our heart, and that he can help us to be more grateful. This commandment, unlike the other commandments, deals with an attitude. So it's more of an inward testament to our soul, versus the other ones we're actually having to perform a deed or action for that commandment to be broken. We also learn that to covet doesn't always deal with money. I think that we associate that with the majority of the things, and that kind of is our first thought. But to covet, it doesn't just deal with money. We could covet someone's position, their job, power, if they have fame, if they are liked by more people outwardly. All those things can be ways that we covet someone. And then we also learn that to covet doesn't mean that we can't want things. Or this verse kind of tells us that we can't not want things. And that leads me to 1 Corinthians 12:31, where it says we are to eagerly desire the greater gifts. God doesn't tell us that we can't want nice things or we can't want more from life. It's just we have to focus on what our inward soul is saying when we want those things. And that kind of brings us to the question of where do we cross that line? How do we know if wanting something is normal or if we're coveting? And another pastor brought up the fact that if you believe that item that you're coveting is necessary for your happiness, then you're definitely coveting. Like your heart is not in the right spot. We also learn that coveting is an invisible sin. Unlike the other ones, like we clearly see you murdered someone. We clearly see you stole something. We can't outwardly see a person coveting. And it's not a sin that is spoken. Most people aren't going to come to the pastor and say, pray for me, or go to God, pray for me, I have a covetous heart. No, most people don't do that. So we need to be able to look at the inside of us and really address that, because it is an invisible sin. It's not going to be outward for a lot of people to know. And then probably one of the things that I notice most is that coveting begins at home. And I know if you go back to the scripture, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And that kind of goes back to the fact that coveting begins at home. It starts close to the heart. We're not going to covet a billionaire that we don't know personally. We're going to covet our neighbor. It's like keeping up with the Joneses. We're going to covet the people that we are exposed to and we see every day, because that's going to be more transparent. It's going to be more boldly put in front of us in terms of sin. So the next part that I'm going to address is why we covet. And one of the reasons is we're just born in sinful nature. And this leads me to passage Mark 7:21-23, where it says, "For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and make a man unclean." So it's in our nature to have this sinful reaction. And so coveting, it's a sin that starts from our heart. And another thing that we know and why we covet is we believe as worldly humans that material things are going to satisfy our soul. But God says in Luke 12:15, "Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Basically, nothing on this earth is going to satisfy us. We are an infinite heart, and so we cannot be satisfied by any worldly possessions. And lastly, how can we fix coveting stuff? So one of the things that we can do is we can guard our heart. We can guard what we're exposed to, what we allow ourselves to react to, whether that's watching who you follow on Instagram, or not comparing your wealth or your position to others. Comparison will steal your joy. So it's just guarding your heart to your thoughts and what you're exposing yourself to. One way you can get rid of a covetous heart is to become a giver. If you're a giver, you clearly don't need those extra things. And it's been said you can't be a giver and a taker at the same time. And then last but not least, and probably what we overlook the most, is asking Him to give us a grateful heart. We need to have gratitude for what He's given us and what He will give us. And it's often hard to, acknowledge that and ask Him for that, because gratitude is not an inborn language in our hearts. We have to outwardly go and ask Him for that. So if you find yourself, becoming jealous or envious of others and what they have, just guard your heart. Maybe give a little bit more and pray that He will give you a sense of gratitude.